Alright guys, it's Hank here with an AGR 8 at 8 o'clock. It's the second one of today, but I figure I've got a lot of material to go over, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was some of the increased chatter that I see about a second American Civil War. And a lot of times when I hear people talk about this, I'm not sure that they understand what the broader ramifications of such a foolhardy misadventure would really entail. And this is largely due to events that we expect to see in the future. I can assure you that there are going to be difficult times that will be getting more difficult as time goes on into the future, and it doesn't need to be exacerbated with war, especially not with seditious or treasonous ideas about waging war against the United States government. That is not something, that's not a path that you want to go down. And it's a path that's not going to lead anywhere. Yes, it is true. You have a lot of people in the country that are ideologically subverted. And this had taken place over the course of many, many, many years. But what I hope people understand is that the people that talk about these terms like socialism or communism or capitalism or fascism often don't really know what the definition of these words really are, or what the ramifications of having one of those types of systems in place. Now, I'm the first one to admit that we have certainly we have issues inside of our government, but it's not really an issue of something that you attack with guns and bullets and force. Pretty much at this point, what people need to realize, what the real challenge is the environmental challenges that we all face. What you should really focus your attention on is the fact that the jet stream is dipping down, and you've got the southern jet stream that's coming up from the Caribbean and meeting and carrying a lot of moisture up into the polar jet stream, basically, which is dumping a tremendous amount of rain we've already seen in the Midwest. Now, most people say, oh, well, it's the chemtrailing, it's the geoengineering. But what few people are aware of is the planetary bodies that are inside of our solar system that are causing solar disturbances and gravimetric disturbances. And if you look at the moon, or you look at the sky, or you see the sky turn bright at night, this will be evident. That's not something that the government made up. That's just nature. It's a cosmological sort of thing. And what people have to realize is we're going through a magnetic pole shift. And I've spoke about this in previous videos, and you can see a little bit over it in Censored Science. So basically, the magnetic north, or the magnetic pole that was in Canada, is weakening, and it's going to be strong in Siberia. And with the increased solar radiation that we have coming in, and sort of a powerful yet challenged magnetosphere, which is basically the Earth's shields, is allowing more of that solar radiation to come in and heat the waters. And this is why you're seeing in the Pacific, which is deep deep water and should be cold water. We have undersea volcanoes going off there. If you're aware, you will know that there are more volcanoes going off, more seismic disruptions around the world than we've ever seen in our entire lives. And they're increasing all the time. So it's very probable, it's a bit of speculation on my part, but I think that the undersea volcanoes are, of course, erupting, which those deep waters, which are supposed to be very cold, are warm. And if you understand a little bit about oceanography, you know that convection currents work in different layers, subsurface. And I've said before, it is not really cold that kills as much as heat. And this is why we're seeing massive die-offs and extremely powerful storms that we don't ordinarily see come out of the Pacific. So you're talking about a civil war based on ideology. That's not going to solve anything. I mean, who would your real enemy be? Would you say that it's, you know, the bought and paid for politician who's corrupt? I mean, who paid him? Or who is responsible for that? Is it the kid that was basically educated on social media because he had no parents in the home and has a bizarre worldview that is essentially communist because he's been badly miseducated? Are you going to shoot him just because he's, well, ignorant? Do you expect that with all the crop losses that we're seeing, the fact that we lost a tremendous amount of grain and cattle, that our food supply won't be challenged? And the things that they're using to try and mitigate some of this incoming solar radiation is also damaging to the environment. So let's add on one more thing that the military is drilling for right now, and that's nuclear, biological, chemical. I don't think that they're drilling and doing exercises on that because they expect to be attacked. I think the military has every full, and this is speculation on my part, a full understanding of what's going to happen when the Cascadia quake goes off. Because it's not a matter of if, but when. And the reason that I know this is because when I was younger, I was part of a gifted and talented program. And even on the East Coast in Virginia, where I was, they had us focused on certain things. One of them was oceanography, and the other was earthquakes, essentially. And I'm sure with the pressure that they put in computer science, a couple of other things, but they really put a lot of pressure on us in those areas, and we were on the East Coast. So even back then, they knew that the Cascadia subduction zone, the Juan de Fuca plate, and the I think it's they call it a transition when they plates rub against each other down near San Andreas, were all going to be under tremendous pressure, and they wanted early warning systems for that. And so, of course, they were teaching us about these things. They wanted us to design sensors and things like that. Now, I can only imagine the pressure that they would have put on the gifted and talented kids in the western states. So if we were under pressure to do that, I could imagine that pressure was greatly intensified on that coast to develop sensors and other things of that nature. Well, the nerds out there, my colleagues on the other coast, I'm sure that they were successful. In fact, I know they were. We can see things, Dutch Sense talks about, and they've got the instruments, and they're able to predict with, especially if you add in the planetary alignments, when we're going to have these earthquakes. I mean, they've been very, very accurate. And the Cascadia quake they would say probably on a preparedness level of 1 to 10, they're below a 1, because not even the law enforcement agents out there in Seattle are aware of this threat. I think the last time they did drills was around 2000. And the source for this is pretty good, because Marfugel has been talking about it. And he's an outstanding investigative journalist looking into different things. So those areas had been hit about 100 years ago, around 1900. Seattle, San Francisco, those areas were razed. And what they did was they reconstructed, or they rebuilt the cities on top of uncontrolled fill. Well, I have a little experience in geotechnical engineering, and when you build things on uncontrolled fill, the ground is not going to be very stable at all. So I'm sure they mitigated some of this by driving caissons or concrete pylons into the ground to give the high-rise structure some support. But that does not mean the majority of the land around there is going to undergo a process called liquefaction, where essentially the ground turns to quicksand. And a lot of those buildings out there, unlike the Japanese may have been some of the best prepared people in the world for an earthquake. And we saw what happened when Fukushima went off, when that massive tsunami and earthquake struck out there. The buildings and things didn't fall over because their grandparents knew that that was coming, and they over-engineered the buildings to be able to flex. Only a few buildings on the West Coast in the United States were constructed that way because the reconstructions that were done in history were done so long ago. And so it's a lot of masonry buildings, and the infrastructure is going to crumble. And if you've not been to the West Coast, you need to know that a lot of areas that lead from one place to another are not accessible unless the bridges are up, because of the huge depths of the chasms that break up these different communities. So if the bridges go out, which they will on a 9.0 earthquake, the only way to support that area is going to be with airlift or helicopters, which are going to be difficult to base anyway. So rescue efforts will take a long time. Okay, so let's add to that all the power that's generated there on the West Coast. Now, there are some hydroelectric plants and things a little bit more towards the east on the other side of the mountains. I believe in Idaho, they use a lot of hydroelectric power. But that level of quake could even disrupt those operations that far east. And the Department of Homeland Security has already told everyone, you need 6 months to a year of food, and you need to be able to deal without power for that long, because you could potentially be looking at a situation where the power is out all the way 26 states in, from west to east. Now that's severe. Now let me add a little bit more to that. A lot of the food in this nation is produced in California. A lot of the imports coming from the east are brought through, Long Beach, I believe, is the major port facility there. Now, if that port facility is knocked offline, how are rescue efforts going to be able to help from that side? Who are we going to call on to be able to basically provide support on that side of the coast? If the Chinese are somewhat hostile to us at this juncture, the Russians are probably only lukewarm. Although the United States and Russia have had a long history of supporting one another when times get really tough. We've shipped them grain and corn and all kinds of things before. And so we do, with Russia, we do have reciprocal arrangements a lot of times to be able to help each other, which is very important. Which, again, is one of the things that I don't understand about the quality of thinking geopolitically in Washington, which is why I guess people clamor for civil war. But there is no goal, I believe, that you can achieve with violence in this regard, because you don't win ideology. Your ideologies are not one. That's not a victory you kill your way to. Sure, you can kill everybody that disagrees with you until, well, there is no more argument. But think about the damage that would be done, because in my opinion, we need every single able-bodied American to be able to participate so we can help each other mitigate the damage from the things that are coming. So let me add another piece to the puzzle. Because of the way that these planetary bodies are moving in the solar system, it's causing the sun to have massive solar flares, or what they call coronal mass ejection, electromagnetic discharges. Now, back in the 1800s, we had something called the Carrington event, which fried telegraph lines and things like that, but we weren't so dependent on technology and our electrical grids for heat and whatever else. So if back in 2012, we missed one of these major solar flares by like a day or 2 days, the Earth was just ahead of that cone, that if that had struck, bye-bye power grid, bye-bye internet, it would have been gone. Now, since then, the federal government, which you seem to hate so much, has been working very hard to strengthen these electrical grids and defend the nation from cyber warfare and cyber attacks. Don't think for a moment, I mean, you look at the political establishment in Washington, and yes, it is a clown show. And that's why you shouldn't focus too much on that. What background does Donald Trump have, quite frankly? He was part of an entertainment industry. He participated in the WWE, WWF, Vince McMahon sort of thing. He's a real estate agent. It's not to say that he's not a very clever, intelligent, charismatic, energetic businessman. He is, absolutely. Now, who is his opponent? Probably the most hated woman in all of the free world, and not free world, Hillary Clinton. So there was no choice. It's important to even understand that you live in a republic. You do not live in a democracy. So your vote, it does count. You go out and you vote, but it is not a direct democracy. Your vote is counted, and then the Electoral College makes the decision about who should be the president. This is to prevent a little bit of the idiocracy. Now, the corruption that we have seen from the narco presidents and previous generations, start to think outside the box. Now, it was criminal. But what has Langley's objective really been? Of course they're going to obfuscate it. It's the CIA. That's what they do. That's their job. What their major goals were? Hard to say. Were they really, so corrupt as to bring in a lot of drugs here into the United States from the poppy fields in Afghanistan? Without a doubt, have had nefarious elements denied or suppressed technologies and killed inventors and scientists and holistic doctors and all sorts of things like that. Sure, absolutely, that's all been done. But can you really say that that was a governmental body that did that, or are we essentially looking at oligarchical or very, very powerful interests purchasing aspects of the government and using it to their own ends or for their own means? When you look at the structure of the government and how big it is, you have to understand that there's no one power that's controlling it. It's a series of competing interests inside of there. Like Donald Trump, and I hate to break it to you guys, the president is almost as much a figurehead as the Queen of England is. He's a public figure that's sent out there to convey a message to you. In the Republic, as it was originally intended and designed, it was to have certain executive powers where the president could restructure, but don't have the unrealistic expectation that you're going to put a man in place that's going to be able to undo 30 years of corruption and root out all the treason and all of the other things that have led us down this road to where we are today. And it's largely been an asymmetric attack on the United States conducted by enemies all from within and from without. You have to understand the incredible power of other nations in this world that have, and empires that have existed much longer than our beloved republic. Our beloved republic is only a couple of 100 years old, and add a few years. The Chinese empire is about 2,000 years old. Rarely do they wage war. They are experts at subversion, infiltration, and assimilation. It's much more a Chinese tactic to send Chinese into a village, a few immigrants, and then the immigrants have children, and more children, and more children, and more children. And after a time, well, that's China. You could probably see that in Vancouver. That's more their style. So you look at the food shortages, you look at the potential for a loss of electrical power, you look at the potential for the United States to take a electronic attack or cyber warfare attack from both either inside the nation or outside the nation. You look at the markets, well, see, you know, the American people are not the only ones pissed off that a lot of these bad decisions were made. I mean, a large portion of the world is extremely pissed off. And so are, you know, all the money people. If people don't feel like they can get a fair investment with open books and clear accountability, with honest leadership, they will not invest in the United States. We've already seen a flight from the dollar. It was the death of the petrodollar, and I believe I've talked about that in a video before if you want to see, you know, when the petrodollar was really over. If you want to think about it in terms of derivatives inside of the market or the algorithmic trading inside of the market may never fall again. It could have a correction, or the algorithms could continue to run the stock market in perpetuity. It may be that they don't really have any control over it. and some of the people that are making decisions inside of government that you don't know who their faces are, or maybe people on the outside of government manipulating people inside of government, you're not going to see their faces. You're not going to know how they subvert you unless you study methods of subversion, and there are many. But other societies, like I say, around the world, focus and understand asymmetric attack. Now, in China, you know, China has values that are antithetical to what we treasure and prize in the United States and the Western world as far as freedom of speech. And I'm basically going to boil it down to something very simple: life, liberty, and property. And I believe that was John Locke, but they changed it to pursuit of happiness. But originally it was life, liberty, and property, and that no person should be deprived of these things. To limit government. But see, in China, it's very easy for Americans to have an Amerocentric perspective. But in China, the old philosophies, they take governance very, very seriously. So the average Chinese person is not going to speak ill of the government. One, because it's taboo, because they don't feel like it's their place in society. But the people that are in government in China, if they're caught doing anything corrupt, they are executed. Okay, so there wasn't that long ago that I believe they had, they were building a railway in China, and there was an administrator that was appointed to oversee the project, and he cut costs for some kickbacks, and whether it was his fault or just an anomaly, a real accident, a failure in the engineering, a failure in the materials, the train crashed, killed several Chinese citizens. They executed him. I believe they executed him. So that's how seriously they take governance. Here in the United States, it seems to be a little bit more, and I spoke about this in a previous video called Cohesion, where the fight for communism and some of the brainwashing and things that really typified the psychology of the people that remain in the Senate and in Congress, where they believe that any kind of making money is good, is acceptable, because the entire object is to make money, more and more money. Well, it's a disease of greed. And because they've gone through using subversive methods and election rigging and brainwashing and all this other stuff to not really truly convey to the people, I mean, it has put them in a very precarious position. I mean, the average American, I mean, certainly you're angry because you've been disenfranchised, and you notice that the money is losing its purchasing power because the brick is on the printing press, and you don't like being experimented on, and you don't know why they're spraying the skies, and you don't understand why they're using electromagnetic frequencies, and you don't understand why the youth has been subverted, and you can't get health insurance, and the politicians never seem to follow up on what they're doing, and they're not prosecuting bankers and other things like that. They're allowing crimes to slide, which are very, very clear. Potentially, what could that be for? Could that be for to entice fools into treasonous acts? I mean, I very much think that our problem is treason in the country, and adding treason and sedition to that is not helping anyone. What you need, what I implore you to focus on, is the earth changes. And to understand, okay, the Cascadia quake goes off, let's add another layer of difficulty to that. Okay, you don't have power, can't ship food out, the ports are destroyed, all the buildings are masonry, so it's going to be mass casualty. Power losses because the grid can't support it well, you know, inside of the United States, almost 26 states in, almost all the way probably to the Mississippi River. Worst case scenario, I would think. And then all of the nuclear waste that's sitting out there in the old Mark I reactors, where they haven't moved the radiological material off or fortified the chemical plants or any of these natures. You know, the reasons why the military trains for nuclear, biological, and chemical, because those are the types of environments they're going to have to enter to perform rescue missions. So, what do you intend to do? What is your logistical, strategic objective? Are you trying to go into cities and wipe out everybody that says that they're communist? I mean, do you intend to go to Washington and shoot the people that really aren't in any power anyway? I mean, there is no enemy. It's in your thought, it's in your mind, it's in your spirit. And such challenges we are facing and are going to be facing moving into the future, that it is going to take a tremendous amount of cooperation for all of us to band together and to survive. And when it comes to the people that are ideologically subverted in the cities, they're going to run out of food. They're going to see significant rises in the cost of food, because what happens when you lose your corn? What happens when you're not able to plant again? Not only can you not use those things to make the high fructose corn syrup that is the basis of pretty much all of the food that is designed, you're not going to have that, but you're also not going to have ethanol to add to the fuel. So fuel prices are going to go up. And because we have just-in-time delivery systems, you know, delivering it, people putting gas in their car, and being able to produce food with factory machinery because it requires food in areas that are still arable, I can assure you that there are going to be problems inside the cities. Okay, so what happens when there's problems inside the cities? Well, the people, out of desperation, may begin to riot. And for the most part, people have been so used to comfort, they're not hearing the warnings that the Department of Homeland Security is telling people. You know, the military really has kind of a strange, in my opinion, way of dealing with the civilian population, as far as having all this non-disclosure agreements and things like that about the things that we're facing. And I'm quite surprised at the politicians not bringing this to the people in a more direct and forceful way. But maybe you could understand it from a military commander's sort of perspective. Now they do an assessment based on who's going to live and who's going to die, and how can they achieve victory with the minimum amount of losses or inflicting the most amount of casualties on their enemy to get them to submit. So they do calculations in that way. So what calculation perhaps did they do? Could they say, well, if we warned everybody in a very serious way, could, with the food shortages that we're looking at in the future, we be able to support those populations, or are we going to have to move more resources into crowd control and urban control for all the people that don't understand what's going on and refuse to prepare? You could even look at it another way. Say they've known these Cascadia quakes and the Juan de Fuca plate, everything on the West Coast is really going to happen. They know this is going to happen. Not a matter of if, but when. So maybe that is why they allowed all the prices to go up in California and the immigrants in, to create a situation where you had an exodus of your most valuable human capital leave California. Because, you know, you could go and tell people until you're blue in the face that something is going to happen, and very rarely are they ever going to believe you. I mean, it's stories like this are even told in the Bible. I mean, this in the days of Noah. Noah's trying to warn everybody the rain is coming, but yet until they feel the pain or until the event happens, they're not going to move. They're not going to respond because they don't think it's credible. Well, it ain't even going to happen. That's tomorrow, not today. Which is also part of the short-term thinking that really is part of the quarterly, I call it quarterly consciousness of the typical person, or, you know, being programmed into 30-minute episodes or hour-long episodes, and then things are resolved at the end. So they drive the price up, the human capital leaves because, well, you could tell them they wouldn't do it, so you apply a little discomfort and they're out of there, and you save a significant amount of your most valuable human capital, because they're not going to want to hear, yeah, the whole thing's going down, you got to move. They're not going to hear that. So personally, I believe in honesty. I believe in trying to convey the truth. I believe that being forthright and honest is the best approach. But we know, and we've seen this in history, time and time again, that no matter how much you reinforce things to many people, there's only going to be a few people that really can understand the broader picture and that are actually going to act on that information. Unfortunately, most people need to feel a little discomfort or chaos in order to motivate them to move. So what you call corruption could be one of the ways that your countrymen are trying to look out for you to get you off there. And if they drive the prices out, surely you got a handsome sum for that, for your relocation efforts, in order to save population. Now, that's a very military way of thinking about things. Now, when we look at the markets, as far as them being unregulated and mismanaged, well, number one, the Princeton School of Economics should be treated as a, you know, like a level 3 hot zone bioweapons lab that deserves full containment, because the philosophy of Greenspan, and he was the one that, you know, back in the 70s, they were already developing the algorithms to do financial trading, high-frequency financial trading, and at that time, I guess you could be under the illusion that you could basically print money into perpetuity based on the fact that the fiat currency could be backed with force and with the petrodollar. That's what that's been about. But fiat currencies can only last, they generally last about 30 or 35 years. And this one has been delayed a little bit longer, and I suspect because of the earth changes. And perhaps that's why the establishment is trying to distract everybody, so they can continue their efforts for as long as possible before the proverbial shit hits the fan. So think more along the lines of not going out and killing your way to victory, but what is going to be required to feed your family, feed as many people as possible, teach people how to purify water. The most valuable skill, or the most valuable anything, is your own skill set. And lacking skill set, books and notes and knowledge. Because sure, you can get a Berkey water filter and you've got about 6,000 gallons. But you can also teach your neighbors how to purify water. And they're not going to want to attack you. They're going to want to help you because you're demonstrating to them what is necessary for them to be able to survive. So they're going to follow you and they're going to protect you. I don't think anybody's really going to care when you're in these disaster type situations what's in your bank account. So, and I've said this before in a previous video, there's very little that separates the lawyer from the unemployed guy 2 or 3 blocks from one another when you look in their pantries. And that's a fact. So the constructs that people have about reality, about ideology, about ideological warfare, and all these other things are very much just concepts. They're very important. And in my heart, this was a quote by Rousseau. I think the freedom is in the heart of the free man. He carries it with him everywhere. This is what you use in your heart. And if the social media platforms want to shoot themselves in the foot by getting rid of more freedom of speech and just to instigate and irritate the American population, I mean, I can already see them moving towards trying to mitigate that. In a real capitalist society, the mainstream media outlets would fail and they would be replaced. And all that is a natural course of action that will come about, and you will not need to kill anybody or fire a shot to get that done, because that is just simple. That's the way it goes. It happened to the Soviet Union. Were they firing shots at each other? Well, they do in Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia dissolved, it became Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, and Montenegro, and one more. That's precisely the situation that you do not want to find yourself in, because it was recently outlined in a YouTube video by, I think, that security guy 42 or something, all the horrors of war. Yeah, don't ice what I would call the shit cake with violence, because there's going to be hard times ahead that are not going to require a whole lot of killing. This is not a battle that you're going to kill your way to victory. This is a battle where it's all about cooperation and education. And I know that the American spirit is one of rugged individualism. And don't confuse me, because, I'm not talking communism where the state owns anything. This is where these kids really do not understand. They think communism is kind of like a communal living where everybody shares and, everybody goes along to get along, and to those that have the most need, it gets distributed. Well, that's very idealistic. In communism, the state owns everything, and that's just that. So typically in communism, it's the people that don't have anything that really get hammered. So the capitalistic mindset is more of one where I give, you give. So, and that type of system has gone on and on and on forever. Ever since they were able to come up with weights and measures, people have been trading. And money is only a medium of exchange. There are many ways that you can legally do mediums of exchange with notes and promises of payment and things like that. Now, the Federal Reserve System was a system that was designed to kind of flatten out the fluctuations in the market cycle, because market cycles are typically 7 to 8 years. And people were getting tired of the boom bust type of thing because it was causing a lot of poverty. Because, well, in a true capitalist society, it's very difficult to make profit especially on speculative adventures or ventures. So they wanted to try and smooth out these major ups and downs. So they brought in, the Federal Reserve in order to kind of tweak the economic system to create a kind of a level, just kind of a level. Well, it got out of control when they needed to fund the Vietnam War. Nixon wanted to keep things on the gold standard, but the enemy that you cannot see and that you will not kill your way towards because you will have no idea who it is, was the one that came in and told Nixon, nope, it's going to go to a fiat system. So, for what reason that was done, maybe it had something to do with being able to get all of the Saudis' oil and just give them paper in return. So don't underestimate your countrymen. Don't underestimate the cleverness. I love the stereotype that, all Americans are stupid and they're dumb and they're fat and they're lazy and so forth. But for such a young nation, we didn't get where we are by being stupid. And of course we have a lot of problems. And of course we have a lot of challenges. And of course there's a lot of corruption. But things have changed with the speed of the internet. So systems analysis enables a better system of being able to find corruption. Everything is pretty much electronically tracked, so it's very difficult for criminals to get away with crimes. That's why all this stuff is so easily exposed now, and should give any miscreant pause before they got down with criminal acts. So, not knowing what the future holds, but expecting some major changes, I highly discourage you from considering a violent action. Because, you just never know. You never know. And from what I'm able to gather, there's a lot of National Guard units that are already, a lot of military units that are already, they saw a lot of the soldiers and stuff being experimented on, used as guinea pigs. None of that sat well. A lot of the officer level military people are being pressed on economically. So I'm sure that that there is a bigger picture that you need to kind of take a deep breath and stand back at. Like, I know that at my age that there's no way that I can save for retirement, all this stuff. It's been disincentivized. But I'm also looking at a pole shift in between 5 and 7 years. I'm also looking at major catastrophes and food shortages. So, really, to my estimation, I don't think I'm really going to be looking at that sort of retirement that my grandparents had. Not due to sheer corruption and incompetence, but out of forces that are beyond my control. So bear that in mind and count to yourself what is truly important and how you will mitigate the damage from these things that are coming on the earth, and how we can all cooperate with one another to rectify, change the mistakes of the past. Because there are a lot of solutions out here. Another beauty of the internet, if we can keep the grid up, because we can quickly resolve these conflicts, and we can quickly come to faster and better solutions. And I assure you, there are technologies out there. I mean, what did the United States do? We got a bunch of stuff from China. They built all this stuff up on infrastructure based on oil, and maybe our people had brand new energy the whole time. So China's built an obsolete infrastructure while we were waiting for these major earth changes to come through. And then we pull out the new energy and rebuild our infrastructure, having not wasted all that money, having not destroyed our environment as badly as the Chinese have done. And what did we give them in return? Little technology they stole, because, like I say, the Chinese have an excellent infiltration, a reputation for excellent infiltration and intelligence operations. And of course, everything that was, as far as data goes, was compromised by the Chinese. So, and then of course they bought the Clintons. That's where really I think everybody is really extremely pissed off. And I think the powers that be, if they really want to very, very quickly regain some confidence, which they will do. I mean, it's a lot easier than for them, than putting down an entire insurrection or having a population that doesn't want to listen to the central authority figure. It's much easier to deal with a few corrupt politicians who the military establishment already hates anyway, and sees them as criminals and guilty of treason, which, to my estimation and knowledge, they indeed are. So, how they could do something quite public with that. Personally, I'm more in favor of an open trial, but I mean, history does show there's a lot of ways that statements can be made like that. So, yeah, it may have even been that they put Obama in place because they knew that he was going to be the fall guy for the change in the system. So, don't underestimate your countrymen. Don't underestimate the American spirit and the fact that we really, really do believe in our constitutional principles. And when you're in something like the Marine Corps, there are two things they will teach you, and they will teach you about defending the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic, and they will teach you about Jesus Christ. So, yeah. Don't be so quick to think that just because a couple of money men and politicians are being allowed to make asses of themselves, that there might not be a broader play. But focus on these earth changes that are coming, and be ready to protect your families and to help other people, to be able to teach. And in time, those ideological differences will smooth out if you're articulate and you're a good teacher. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to hear it, but a lot of those people are inside cities, and those cities are going to have problems with supply, which is something that we're going to have to even try and address in that way. So, it's been Hank. I guess let me touch before I end a little bit too on the geopolitical ramifications of an internal civil war. Do you think that the Chinese would be happy about that? Do you think that the Latin American countries and South American countries would be happy about that? Or the Russians? They would be. And then you have a major earthquake out on the west, and they can just bring their landing craft right up there during the turmoil, and well, you know, you've got Russian and Chinese troops up there. Why they would want to seize that territory, I don't know. I can't really see any strategic value to that for them, but they have large populations, and I don't speak Chinese, so that's something I think we need to learn. You know, if you were looking at something to do other than civil war, why don't you pull some Chinese television shows off the Chinese internet and let your kids watch them like they would watch Sesame Street for an hour or two a day? So they're already watching TV. If they catch it at the right age, they'll be able to speak Mandarin. Or if you looked at it from the Mandarin is the main language, and Cantonese would be that of Taiwan. So having one of your children being able to speak Chinese is going to give them a tremendous advantage over anybody else and make them very valuable for the future. So those are the types of things I implore you to consider. The rest of it, I have a feeling, is either not going to really matter so much as we move into the future, because those types of things are going to mitigate themselves, or just like in the Roman Republic, when the Roman Republic contracted, yeah, Caesar did step out, and we saw what happened there. You know, we saw what happened at the end of the Soviet Union. I just don't want parts of my country to look like Yugoslavia, because, well, that's just, you know, icing on a shit cake. So avoid the violence. All right, it's been Hank. Catch you on the flip side.